There's really quite a bit to say about clauses, and actually, I probably should have added to this, phrases, because they are, the building blocks of English prose. But what I want to do now is just give you the foundations, the basics of what a clause is, what it makes it up, what it's made up of, what a phrase is, and then in the later videos we're going to see how clauses and phrases can go wrong, especially in the improving sentences section, because the improving sentences section is all about sentence structure. So when you do the error IDs, which are when you get, those sentences with underlined words, versus the improving sentences, which are sentences with underlined portions of the sentences, this deals more with kind of errors of agreement, whereas this is going to deal much more with errors of sentence structure. However, that doesn't mean there can't be agreement errors here and there can't be sentence structure errors here. So sentence structure. How can we put sentences together legally? So first, what is a clause? Simply put, a clause is any group of words that contains a subject and a verb, a subject-verb relationship. In other words, it contains a finite verb. If you remember back to our verb discussion, a finite verb is a verb that's been conjugated. So, walks, sang, bought, fights, whatever. Right? Or even, bite. Any verb that's been conjugated with a subject, right? So that clause contains that. That's a clause. A phrase, on the other hand, does not. So no subject-verb relationship. So this could contain, a participle, so something, or a gerund, something with an ing, so, walking, or the past participle walked, can contain an infinitive, like to run, or whatever. We'll talk more about infinitives, gerunds, and participles later, but the point is that a clause contains a subject-verb relationship, a phrase does not. And for our purposes, we're going to focus mostly on clauses, because the errors are going to occur mostly with clauses. Okay, so a clause. There are two main types of clauses you might have heard before. There's the independent clause and the dependent clause, aka the subordinate clause. And let's talk about each one of those. So the independent clause is a sentence that can stand by itself. Right? It's got a subject verb. It doesn't need anything else to make it a complete sentence. So an example would be, I am running today. Right? We've got a subject. We've got our verb, am running, or am if you want to be particular about it. And there you go. The sentence can stand by itself, doesn't need anything else. A phrase version of this sentence might be something like, running today. That's not a great sentence, but you get the idea, right? It contains, a verb form of running contains the same form, but notice it's got no subject here. So this would be a phrase and it needs something else. But anyway, the important thing is this is an independent clause, right? It can stand by itself, no problem. What is a dependent or subordinate clause? Well, as you might tell from the language, a dependent or subordinate clause can't stand on its own. It needs something else to complete the thought. Usually these are introduced with prepositions or with conjunctions or adverbs, right? Any kind of phrase that introduces the sentence but does not allow it to complete the thought. So an example would be because he is singing later. Notice this is not an independent clause. Even though we've got a subject and a verb, this can't stand by itself. This is not. I can't put a period here and leave it as a complete sentence. This would be a fragment if I did. And we'll talk about fragments later. Because he is singing later, well, I need something else. Because he is singing later, comma, blah, 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 blah. I need something to complete the thought. What's another example? Before I leave, ... I need something else, right? This is not a complete sentence. Even though I got a subject and a verb, I need to have, this is a clause, but I need to have something else to complete it. This is dependent or subordinate on an independent clause. Okay, so that is the basic breakdown of independent and dependent clauses. Now, there are other kinds of clauses and other kinds of phrases. Later in the videos, I'm going to go over some other kinds of clauses and phrases, more detail onto subordinate clauses. But at the very least right now, I want to just emphasize that there are independent and dependent clauses. There are also things called relative clauses, which we've seen a little bit earlier, elliptical clauses, adverb clauses, there's just so many other clauses, but for the purpose of the SAT, I want to make sure we have down this idea of independent versus the dependent clause.